In the Dunkin' v. Starbucks equation, we are very much the Starbucks. We're like, we're going to overcharge you for coffee. You're going to wait for a really long time, and you should be like thanking us for the fact that we that you're a Starbucks customer. And like nothing against Starbucks, I'm also like a Starbucks drinker.
You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. I'm Troy Singer here with my friend Bart Kaler. Today's conversation, reclaiming relevance, how higher ed marketing can reconnect with a changing world. In this conversation, I am loving, and Bart, I'm loving a lot of our conversations we've been having lately. This one is with Carol Keese. She's Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at the University of Oregon. She brings a wealth of knowledge that I think all of our listeners can benefit from, and I hope as many people get from this that we can get it out to.
Yeah, we had just such a great conversation. I'm looking forward to sharing that with everyone. I think that Carol is one of those folks that really gets it and really understands what marketing is about, and she's practicing it and doing it, everything from data to understanding how culture and understanding how everything plays into this and how we as marketers need to flex our marketing muscles to be able to help our schools. We just talk so much about, everything from ideas about, trying to break out of the mold and trying to be relevant to our culture. And it's just a fascinating conversation. I think everyone's really going to enjoy it.
Now, listeners, if you like this conversation as much as Bart and I do with Carol, please consider subscribing to the show if you haven't, or leaving us a review, sharing it with colleagues. Again, we do this to connect with the higher ed marketing community. And without further ado, here's our conversation with Carol Keese. Carol, to help us learn a little bit about you, would love to know if you could share something that you've learned recently that our audience would find fun or interesting.
Okay, well, this will give you a bit of insight into how nerdy I actually am. This is unrelated to higher education completely. It's about sharks. I was listening to, I think it was Science Friday, a couple months back, and they were talking about sharks and, how interesting they are and how people misunderstand them and so forth. And 2 points really stood out to me. One was that more people die every year by backing over a cliff trying to get a really good selfie than are killed by sharks.
Wow.
So that's interesting, right? And the second is that sharks have been on this planet for longer than Saturn has had rings.
Wow.
Okay.
I was stunned by that. I even looked it up because I couldn't believe that was true, but it is true. So just in case, you forget how long life has been on this planet, that was, and how tenuous human beings are in the decisions that they make sometimes.
Yes.
To get that really good shot. Anyway, those are my fun or interesting factoids from my mind.
That's great.
Well, since you were a little nerdy, I'll just add in a dad joke of now I'm looking forward. Yes, I'm looking forward to the dangerous selfie week on the Nature Channel coming up.
That's really good, Troy.
We are having fun, but we do want to get into the conversation that we invited you here for, and how higher ed marketing can reconnect with a changing world. And starting out with exclusivity. So traditional higher ed marketing has long leaned on exclusivity and prestige, but would like to know why you think this model is no longer resonating with today's students and families.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're going to be honest with ourselves as a sector, we really have not only marketed ourselves that way, but really profited by marketing our institutions on the basis of a kind of exclusivity, a kind of scarcity model, and frankly, a kind of elitism that I think right now is the basis for some of the pushback that we're seeing as an industry. And I think it's particularly tragic, right? Because higher education is still the largest engine of social mobility that the world has ever seen. And so, the irony of talking about the value of higher education as being something that's very amorphous, that we don't really need to sort of justify the cost of, that it really is overtly or implied an access to social networks and financial networks that advantage a few people, but not the vast majority of the population. You couple that with the increase of the cost of attending college, and it really is no wonder that most Americans look at higher education, which really should be about social mobility for everyone, and see instead a model that feels like it is both not for them and is overcharging them. And I think that is really tragic. And I think that over the last 25 years or so, higher education, the marketing of higher education has really failed to listen to that disconnect and that dissonance between what we have thought is important and what the American people and frankly people all over the world need, because there's certainly no doubt that higher education and the social mobility and the access to knowledge and new knowledge and the development of an educated citizenry is more important now than ever.
Yeah, I love the fact that you kind of started with that, Carol. As we've talked on the podcast before, Troy and I are both, first-generation students, and so we know exactly what you're talking about in the sense that our lives are vastly different than those who came before us, and just that idea of the social mobility and what higher ed provided each of us. And so we've had that conversation many times on the podcast. But one thing as I'm thinking about as you're kind of talking about this is that so many institutions are kind of struggling to define and communicate the value beyond just that outcome. I mean, yes. So many times we talk about, hey, that social mobility is there, you're going to be able to go get a better job, whatever that might be. But what strategies have you seen working well to kind of convey that deeper return on the investment, that citizenry, the idea of personal growth, the way it impacts our country, our society, our culture, or just even critical thinking? I mean, how are you seeing those types of things, being marketed, if for a better word?
Honestly, I'm going to go a little counter to this because I think that those softer benefits are real. And I think they benefit not just the individual, and this is what we've seen in research time and again, the individual, their family, their community, and the nation, right? But I also think that the moment is not now to lead with those intangibles. I think we really instead need to take a step back and apply the basics of marketing to an industry that unfortunately sort of has seen itself as immune from the basic principles of marketing. Which is, what is the business we are in? The second is, who is our most important customer and what do they care about? And the third would be, what is our competitive set? And are we competing on features or price? Because it's only one of those two things.
Right.
And I think that we've leaned into the intangibles as a way of really avoiding some hard conversations about how our product is designed, how we're priced, and are we meeting the needs of our customers, essentially, whether those are students or the families of students or returning students, to really listen to what they are looking for and designing products and pricing structures that actually work for those audiences. I don't really know, and if we were a consumer brand, I can't think of another product that's been less responsive to market feedback. And I can say that because I'm an advocate, I'm a champion, I'm a higher education through and through, and I'm a product of it in 8 ways to Sunday. But I think if we were to substitute, put a consumer brand in here, there's no product that would have survived. I think our collective shortcomings as it relates to consumer feedback and what people have been saying, asking for more flexibility, more pricing flexibility, frankly, more avenues in to access higher education, and more clarity on what that value is. I mean, again, the good news is that the lifetime earnings differential between a high school degree, right, and a college degree is undisputed. And while we are not vocational schools, I think we have not leaned into that truth and other truths that are quantifiable, that can answer the question for people, why should I pay, $250,000 for a college education?
Right.
I think we've relied on those intangibles, maybe to our detriment.
Yeah.
Not that they're not there, but they're insufficient, I think, in this moment.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a point that I just want to tease out a little bit, that the idea that we have, as marketers, need to be able to breathe in and talk about and influence the product and influence the price.
Yes.
So many times I think people who listen to this podcast, that seems like a dream to them. It's like, oh, wow, I would love to be able to be invited to the table before it goes to the accreditor. How do you kind of navigate that, and what would be your recommendation to marketers who are like, how do I get at the table to help inform that at my school?
That's a great question. I think for a long time we've been asking for the seat at the table, and now I think more and more of us have that seat and have the ability to have a direct line to the president and to be sitting at that cabinet level table. I've been in conversations here about diversifying our revenue streams and thinking about how we do that proactively in ways that I think 5 years ago no marketing person would have been engaged in. So I think that is a step in the right direction. I think that, if as chief marketing officers and chief communications officers, we have a thing or two to learn from our peers and our analogs in the consumer world, which is, think about and understand the total value of your brand. And I think too often CMOs think about reputation management, which is certainly a full-time job these days, and student enrollment, which some of us have and some of us do not. We think about being at the table with cabinet level and with our boards and our presidents, helping them understand the total brand equity that we sit on as institutions is significant. And that equity helps us do things like invest in new programs and new program development, because we know that if one part of our portfolio is strong, it allows us to take risks in other parts of our portfolio that may allow us to be more market responsive, right, and more nimble. So here at the University of Oregon, of course, we have a significant athletic operation. We are an R1 AAU research institution. We also obviously confer degrees and educate the next generation of students. Many universities have major academic medical centers, right? All of these are very distinct and different revenue streams and business models. But collectively, we are one brand, and the public sees us as one brand. Marketing professionals, particularly at the top, need to help educate our peers at the table that we should be looking at the entirety of the brand portfolio, understand our competitive strengths and weaknesses, and leverage that portfolio to do things like take some risks, start some pilots, become more market responsive in areas where we can.
I know when I looked up some of your background, you are really rely and lean on the importance of data. So talk a little bit about that from a CMO or a CCO with the idea of bringing that to the table, because I think part of it is earning your way to the table to have that conversation, but then earning your spot to stay there. And I think that means having data and really good information.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a huge advocate of brand perception and positioning data, which I think many in higher ed have really come around to in the last 5 years. I think a lot of higher education marketing has been very inside out, right? This is how we think about ourselves. This is our history. This is who we are. It's like those shots of campus, right? It's why we tend to sound the same. And look the same. I think we need to adopt a very robust process of bringing data from the outside in. right? So I've talked a little bit about thinking about how the rest of the world understands us. Being at the table with our peers, often I'm finding, is an opportunity to remind people that nobody cares how we're structured. Like, nobody cares how we're structured. We have to stop doing this. And I think that bringing data into the table that proves that point over again is really, really important. I also think that from a reputation standpoint, we are not in the spaces where we need to be, right? So when we talk about mind share, and this is another data question, who are we competing with? You know, when we talk about, well, no one knows that we do X or Y. It's like, really, how do we know that?
Right.
And what is the mind share that we want to occupy? What is the space? What's the white space we want to occupy? Who occupies that now? Data can help us tell that story, right? Who are we competing with for share of voice, and what does that look like? Have we thought about who our real competitors are in different sectors, right? For reputation, for research, for philanthropy, and for student enrollment. They're all different. So how do we continue to educate our own leadership and frankly, our own teams? Right. What are the spaces in which we are truly fighting, truly competing, and in which we really care most about winning? And data is an enormous tool for that. And I think, again, an opportunity to take a page from our colleagues in the consumer goods business to say should be constantly in a process, not once every 2 years, but constantly in a process of asking and answering the question, what do people most want from us? And how can we shorten the distance between what they want and what we offer? And whether that's in the reputation space or in the prospective student space and enrollment, whether that's in the research space, or whether, frankly, that a lot of us who are public flagships, what are the state's perception of us, and how do we close those gaps continually? The advent of AI gives us only more tools with which to do that if we understand how to use them properly. But I feel like we're as an industry, often behind the curve on how we use data to educate inside and outside, and to continually work to close the gap between where we are and where our most important audiences want us to be.
That's great. I love that.
Loving this conversation so far, Carol, and would like to move it towards marketing that matters. Now, in general, a lot of higher ed marketing looks the same. You have the campus beauty shots and generic slogans that are similar to one another. What are some of the questions we need to be asking to break out of the mold, or other marketing tactics that would really connect?
Yeah, I think we need to participate in popular culture a lot more than we do. That's one. And I think it's been, we really are in the popular culture. When you think about the power of college athletics, you think about the power of merchandising and licensing, you think about the power of idea generation, when we're really in the business of thought leadership. And yet, we don't participate in many of those spaces, right, to leverage that. And I don't know whether it was a deliberate decision or we just don't think that it applies to us. But I think that we have so many opportunities to show relevance, not just by, putting our messaging in spaces that are novel and different and where the eyeballs are, whether that's YouTube or TikTok or other kinds of spaces. But I'll give you one example. So I say, we're in the thought leadership business, but all we have is ideas, right? We don't produce widgets. We don't make stuff, for the most part. But we are very much in the business of knowledge creation and new ideas. And yet we don't approach the media in the same way that other thought leadership organizations, a Google or an Apple would, right? We don't think about what is the mind share, I'm going to use that word again, that we want to own, and for what, right? So I think we've been engaged in an experiment here to engage in a very deliberate public relations efforts aimed at white label national non-industry platforms, right? New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fast Company, right? The Economist, things like that. So we tend in higher education to talk to ourselves. Nothing against the Chronicle, but that is ourselves.
Exactly.
that is our bubble. right? So how, if we were in politics, if we were in the maker spaces, if we were in influencer spaces, which we frankly are in all those spaces, what would we be doing, right? We would be calling up the Bursons of the world. We would be calling up the Wall Street Journals of the world. We would be talking to Fast Company. We would be talking about, we would be in Wired. We would be in spaces and frankly on influential podcasts where if we have an area, let's say, I'm going to pick one, human performance in sport is one that Oregon is really aiming for in terms of occupying that mind share, right? There are very dedicated with significant reach spaces for just those topics where people are really diving into what is the nexus of technology and human performance, or genetics and human performance, or climate change and human performance that give us tremendous reach. But higher education sort of too often reverts to our owned platforms, if you will, right? Instead of thinking like an outsider, instead of thinking like a subject matter expert and a thought leader, getting into the thought leadership spaces then conveys also more of a leg up for social relevance, for cultural relevance, for being in the zeitgeist, for being in the conversation about the issues that are affecting us now as a society, with the new ideas that we create here on campus. So it's interesting to me that we're not more active in the public relations space, in the thought leadership spaces, when in fact our product is just that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because, I mean, the idea that sometimes I think putting a university brand into a pop culture area, I know that academia kind of ruffles a little bit at that because, like, oh my goodness, what are we doing there? And I know that, like, with Ethan Braden's been on the podcast a few times, and when he was at Purdue,
that's right,
they introduced the NASCAR, and I think he's picked that up again at A&M.
I saw that. Yep, good for him.
And he's another one that leaned into that Fast Company early. Yes. And so, what other current trends or pop culture are you kind of considering? We don't have to get into the secret playbook that U of Oregon's doing, but where are some of the areas that you're saying that, hey, this is where we need to be, this is the kind of pop culture that we need to be, and realize that your academia might have a problem with it, but it's not about them, because it's back to that, are we looking at our belly button, or are we actually helping the society?
That's right. And I worked in academic medicine for a long time, and I think I saw in the very beginning how they would say, well, that doesn't apply to us, all the way to like where we are now in higher education. I've seen the same evolution, right? And no margin, no mission, right? So it stands only to our benefit to be seen as more relevant, and frankly to take the areas where we're already highly connected to popular culture and raise them and raise the visibility, right? And it can be things that are kind of fun and about style and about like the now, right? So we obviously have a deep relationship with Nike. We also have a deep relationship with Disney. We have a deep relationship with Columbia. Many universities have similar relationships with, either style makers or major consumer goods or, major Fortune 100 companies. Leverage that. It's a mutually beneficial relationship for a reason. And so I think being unafraid to tie the university's work in some of these areas and make it more visible. We're certainly economic engines for our regions and for our cities and for our country. So I think there's style, there's substance, there's thought leadership. I think that sponsorship and co-branding is something that also higher education needs to be better at. So, Ethan's done great work with that. I think that we are usually in relationship with, very powerful and influential and consumer-leading organizations that we need to explore how we can partner and co-brand with those organizations for mutual benefit and for greater brand equity. So I think athletics is one area that maybe seems obvious, but I think we can do more with, right? So we have ESPN Game Day opportunities. We have great influencers and an enormous fan base. I don't know if we took the entire collegiate sports and counted the fan base, but it's the size of, a GDP of a small country or maybe a large country, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That is so much part of our popular culture. How do we do more to bring together, to knit together the narrative of the university and its athletic enterprise, right? So there's one. I think many universities have design and product design programs. I think that is an area of like just wild opportunity in terms of whether we're thinking about the next generation of a product or actual fashion design. We're looking at whether we can get into the New York fashion, the spring fashion. How can we bring some merchandise to Fashion Week? How can we bring some merchandise to sort of influencer audiences that are just interesting, new, novel, and frankly, our students create. So how do we create that kind of connection to the broader popular culture? I think even when we talk pop culture, I also want to talk about sort of the culture of business, not just what's the economic benefit that we bring, but also like literally, how are we making crops better? How are you making connecting to the value of research to kitchen table issues that people care about? And I think that's a struggle that higher education and research enterprise in general has had for years. Why should people care about research? But I think we know the answer, which is really to connect it to their lives and to show how research done at academic institutions and universities benefits Americans across the country and always has. And so I think that is something that hasn't gone away. It's only gotten more important in recent years.
One thing when I think about too with popular culture, I often think about the new influencer culture.
Yes.
And so we talk about student voices, and we talk about a lot of times these students that are coming into our campuses have 10, 30,000 followers.
Yes.
How are ways that we can kind of effectively amplify those student stories, even through their own channels, and really to help with a lot of what we've been talking about?
Yeah, Bart, I think you hit on it. I think we've moved into a space where, and I'll be blunt, I think you hire them. I mean, you just hire them. It has to come from inside, like the call has to come from inside the house, right? Like it really has to be inside the organization. We have a communication academy where we hire a dozen or so students and we have them manage the controls of everything from our social media, but also design, studio, photography. We really embed them. And that's been a program. I know we're not the only ones who do it, but I really advocate, do more of that. Do more of that. Hire your graduates, right? Hire them, bring them onto the team. You have to have both the experience, the expertise, and the perspective of some of your senior leaders, and you have to have people that are natives in all the platforms that you're trying to manage in your ecosystem, or it simply won't work. And so there's room for everyone here, but we absolutely need to bring them inside. It's no longer enough to be like, we're going to do like a day on the life of, or we're going to let them do a takeover for a day or two. That was maybe sufficient, 6-7 years ago. It is no longer sufficient. So I'm a huge fan of hiring that talent.
And what I like about that, before we go on, Troy, is I want to just point this out for everybody. She said to hire them and bring them in as a part of your team. Mm-hmm. So that means that they are getting training, they're getting supervision, they're getting a part of who you are, as opposed to saying, here's the keys, go make it work. That's not the way social media is going to work. It's not the way influencers are going to work. So you've got to make that an intentional part of the team. So.
Well, and think about like the skill development, the career development, and the amplification impact, right, of that individual with his or her cohort, right, in terms of bringing, again, more relevance, more student enrollment potential, and more visibility for the brand. Yeah, it's a win for everyone.
Perfect.
Carol, you've referenced consumer product companies earlier, and I think us in marketing, we really look up to and we value the way they market themselves and how they manage the brands that they are amplifying. So would like to know, are there lessons that we can take from the private sector in rebuilding trust and engagement?
Yeah, I think there are many. I think understand the business you're in. And I think that some of where we find ourselves now in this moment in higher education is really not understanding the business we're in. And if it's a business of prestige or it's a business of value creation, we need to understand that, and we need to decide what we're in the business of doing, right? Then we need to really understand who needs to know most, who are our most important audience, and what do they most need. And we need to be in a continual conversation with those audiences in ways that Procter & Gamble are, right, or Unilever or whoever, right? They don't just do it once a year, once every other year. They're continually working to understand the needs of their respective audiences and their competitive set. You only ever compete on either price or features. And I think right now we have a bizarre pricing structure that nobody really understands, that frankly almost no one pays that price, right? And it has had the weird combo effect of both maddening people in terms of like, why are you so expensive? And also cheapening our brands, because in the end, very few, we so deeply discount it that we end up cheapening our own brands, and no consumer good product would do that, right? So I think that we do need to think about pricing. I think we do need to think about packaging and structure, and I think we need to go back to the marketing basics. I mean, it is also the P's, price, product, like placement. Those really do matter. And though the placement has gotten more complex, so have the tools. We can now target with a kind of precision that we certainly couldn't do 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We need to understand where the most important audiences are and how they need to be spoken to, where they are, and get ourselves into those spaces rather than relying on the very broad brush, broad brand prestige factors that clearly are not working for most of the people in this country, and undersell what we actually do. And I think that's sort of the ultimate irony, is that we are a huge engine for social mobility, for public good, for knowledge creation, for the strengthening of communities. And so we really do need to get back to those things, not as an afterthought, but as core to our mission.
I know the first half of my career was in corporate, working with brands like Motorola and consumer brands and things like that. And I often, as I was doing that, I was starting to get introduced into the higher ed marketing. And so I remember doing a lot of work in the late 90s and early 2000s with Motorola, just as this whole idea of what's a text message. And we were doing these demos online to help people understand what you could take a photo with your phone. Nobody ever thought about that. What I found was that a lot of their playbook would then apply to higher ed, because I'm like, okay, they're selling to the same demographic that these schools are trying to sell to. So I really started looking at consumer brands to say, I want ideas. How's Target doing that?
Yes.
And how could I apply that to this school? So what are some of those brands that you kind of pay attention to that you think that higher ed could do a good job borrowing from them on the way that they're marketing?
Duncan.
Talk about that.
I mean, it doesn't work. So Duncan, I think, is an analog for my current university in a way that it wouldn't be for the university that I came from, right? So I think that we also need to think about positioning, like what's our brand persona, what's true of our organizations, and then find the analogs, right, in the consumer world. It like, I can't look at Apple. It would be like completely non-actionable. But I think what Duncan brings actually is a really good for just generally for higher education to pay attention to. Duncan and others, right? Duolingo is another one. And one is, you talk about cultural relevance. I remember before they kind of were on the up and up, and they were, sort of a Northeast working class, like not that good coffee. And it was like Starbucks was the big shiny thing, right? They have, to their immense credit, really embraced, talking about accessibility, right? Accessible brand. They've embraced kind of that everyman spirit, right? Like, very much in opposition to the Starbucks, like, prestige, right? They have a sense of humor that is a mile high. Everyone loves it. Everybody loves an underdog, and everybody loves someone who can like take themselves less seriously. Higher ed is terrible at both of these things. We're terrible. Like, we need to get a lot better about that. Like, I don't know who decided that we were going to be like, super serious and also like not responsive to people. But like the last time I checked, that was not a great strategy for like endearing oneself, right? So I think what Duncan is doing right? They are doing a counter elitist approach, which is being incredibly successful for them. They are making fun of themselves all the time. Right. And very effectively, in a very smart sort of zeitgeist kind of way. They're really speaking the language of now. So is Duolingo, by the way. Did you see the thing about the owl dying? The Duolingo?
I think I saw something about that during the Super Bowl area.
Yeah, right. So just ridiculous, ridiculous, funny, inventive. So I think that's excellent. And I think that Dunkin' has also dialed into popular culture with color, with pink in the Barbie era, with product extensions, right, with partnerships and co-sponsorships with other brands. And I think when you're in the moment in a way that Dunkin' is, you can do those things. You can kind of parlay that moment and that cultural relevance into even greater brand equity, right? And I think higher education would be like served well by following some of what's happening in those spaces, because we suffer from, I think, in the Dunkin' v. Starbucks equation, we are very much the Starbucks. We're like, we're going to overcharge you for coffee. You're going to wait for a really long time, and you should be like thanking us for the fact that we that you're a Starbucks customer. And like nothing against Starbucks, I'm also like a Starbucks drinker, but it's something's working about what Dunkin' is doing, and I think that's the reason why. And I think a lot of where we sit today. And our path back to trust and to value is going to be is going to have to involve taking ourselves less seriously, being more relevant, and maybe having a sense of humor.
Yeah, I love that, and I thank you for kind of helping me go through that, because that's been my thing. It's like look at everybody else. Don't look at other schools. What are they doing? We don't want to be another one of them. We need to be something that's differentiated. I know the very first chapter of my book, I talk about you've got to know who you are to then figure out how you can be different than everybody else. And so
precisely.
Love that. Thank you, Carol.
Yeah.
As we close out, Carol, what is one final piece of advice or insight that you would like to leave with our audience that could help them take action today?
We're in a really difficult spot right now. I mean, this is April of a year that's probably been the hardest year ever in higher education, followed by the second hardest year ever in higher education. I think I would say, don't waste a good crisis. I think this is a really important time for us to reevaluate our value proposition and to do it differently. That playbook is not working. Let's reassess it and let's recreate it. The good news is that crises usually bring opportunity with them to do it differently and to rewrite how we think about the value of higher education and how we reach people with that real, tangible, universal value that we offer in ways that are going to need to be much more relevant, much more responsive, and hopefully a little bit more fun.
Wow. Carol Keese, Vice President and CMO at the University of Oregon. Thank you so much for what you've brought to us and our audience today. For someone that would like to connect with you, follow you, or maybe extend the conversation, how would the best way for them to reach you be?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. Just look me up, Carol Keese, Keese. I'm also at the U of Oregon, so I'm ckeese@uoregon.edu. I'd love to hear from anyone. This is a great, wonderful group of professionals in this line of work. Thank you both for the work that you're doing to elevate our profession and to reach people with real practical advice. I'm just honored to be part of it.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. And we usually end this by some perspective from my partner in crime, Bart. So Bart, do you have any final words for our audience?
Yeah, I think that this has been a great conversation, Carol. Thank you. It goes back to, we talked about Apple a couple times. One thing I like about Apple is the idea that they've got that slogan, the tagline, think differently. Mm-hmm. And I think if you summarize a lot of what we talked about, it's about that. Stop, navel gazing, start looking at things differently, start looking and getting inspiration from outside of our academic bubble, and do the work that it's going to take. It's going to take data. It's going to take putting your shoulder and doing some things different. It's going to take putting your neck out on the line too, to say, hey, I really think that marketing should help make a decision on that new program, that we need to help you with some pricing. We have the tools that we can do that. You have to be bold sometimes to be able to get the place at the table, and then make sure that you are delivering on what you need to do. So I love the ideas about pop culture. We could certainly go on and on about that all day long, but I think that there's some things for us to look at. Look at some of the other schools that are doing that. We mentioned Purdue. Kelly Hiller is doing great things. Ethan's doing great things down at Texas A&M. Carol and her team are doing great things at Oregon. So there's a lot of people out there that you can look at to see what they're doing and learn and take a playbook out of that. So thanks again, Carol. It's been a pleasure having you here today, and really excited to continue the conversations.
Thank you both.
The Higher Ed Marketer podcast is powered by Kaler Solutions, your go-to partner for higher ed mission-fit marketing strategies, enrollment, and branding needs. And sponsored by Ring Digital, your ad targeting experts for higher ed, putting you in front of your specific prospects and inquiries with provable, measurable increases in lift and yield. Until next time, wishing everyone happiness and success in higher ed.